U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action would like to recognize the sponsors of the 2020 Honor the Harvest Forum. Welcome to Farm Food Facts for January 27th, 2021. I'm your host, Phil Lempert. Today, it's all about dairy, and it should be. As many of you have heard me say, many times before, my grandfather is a dairy farmer in Belleville, New Jersey. I grew up not on the farm itself, but when the farm was closed, we still had all the barns and everything else. So when it comes to dairy, my heart is there. So with us today is Marilyn Hershey, a dairy farmer who operates a 600-cow dairy farm in Pennsylvania with her husband, Duane. She serves as the chair at Dairy Management, Inc., and is also a published author. She's the secretary of the Mid-Atlantic Dairy Association Speakers Bureau and serves on the National Dairy Promotion and Research Board, among other various community organizations. Marilyn recently joined the USFRA Board of Directors in 2020. Welcome, Marilyn, to the board, and welcome to Farm Food Facts.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
So, Marilyn, I hate to start, this conversation this way, but how has COVID affected dairy?
Well, I think we all saw early on there were some really there were a lot of effects in the store. People were in a panic. People were fear buying, and I had a neighbor that purchased 7 gallons of milk and had them in her freezer just because she wasn't sure, would she have milk in the next week to feed her family. So off the bat, we saw a lot of things happening in the grocery stores. That's where we saw that. Food service is they use a lot of dairy, and we rely on
real
them.
Dairy.
They use real dairy. They use real cream. They use a lot of butter. They use a lot of milk, and there's a lot of cheese in food service. And so there's a tremendous amount of dairy products that are used in food service. And you look at across the board and across the country and realize how many of these restaurants are shut down or were shut down early on, and it did impact us a tremendous amount. And we were able to one thing the checkoff was able to do is one thing we saw was stores and grocery stores were putting limits on how much milk that consumers could buy. And so we were able to call them and tell them, look, we have the milk. There's not a limit that you will get milk to put on your shelf. Please do not limit people for the amount, because it just added to the fear.
Absolutely. And, that's an important lesson that was learned out of this, for you to be able to reach out and communicate to those retailers and say, don't limit it. We've got the supply. What are some of the other lessons that you've learned as a result of the pandemic?
One of the lessons I think about so much is the relationships. So we had relationships that were already established with Feeding America. We had relationships that were established with the food service partners that we have. Pizza was a food that people still bought it takeout, were able to get it takeout. And we were able to work with our partners and do some extra promotions. Pizza Hut in particular did a promotion, gave away a ton of pizzas, gave away a pizza to every senior that graduated. And it was a promotion deal with Pizza Hut and with the dairy farmers. So, we just had to, we went to each one of our partners and talked to them. Is there anything special we can do? Is there anything extra we can do? And so through food service that we're still operating, so McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, they all, and Domino's, they all, stepped up. We also did a couple other pizza places that we don't typically have a ongoing partnership with, but we were able to through COVID. And if I can just for a minute go back to Feeding America, that was a critical relationship for us to already have established, because they saw a huge increase in demand in their food banks, and we were able to work with them and move a significant volume of milk through Feeding America.
So, and I agree with you. I love Feeding America. I think they do, and certainly during COVID, have done a phenomenal job. They really have. Um, when you're talking, what comes to mind is probably the only benefit of the pandemic has been collaboration that
Mm-hmm.
I've seen, whether it's farmers, ranchers, retailers, Feeding America, everybody working together so much more than I've ever seen in my career. Are you seeing the same thing?
I would say absolutely, and it goes back to having those relationships in place. It gave us the ability to really work and get things done at a much faster pace, at a much stronger pace than if we would have had to call Feeding America and establish that relationship right off the bat. But absolutely, people were I'll go to schools, just pivot to schools just for a minute. When you look at schools and, all of a sudden these children who are food insecure are not in the building to get their milk
Milk
and
and their
yeah,
protein. Yeah,
and food.
yeah.
So, we worked with an organization we have called Gen Youth, and they worked with schools, and USDA actually lifted the requirement for a certain volume being served in schools, and they let us be able to serve whatever volume we could get into a school. And so children were able to go home with a half a gallon of milk as opposed to a single serve. And
That's right.
just to be able to get food into their hands was just a true collaborative effort across everybody was agreeable. Everybody wants to be able to help those children and get dairy into their hands.
Yeah, I love the example that you just gave. Having, a school kid being able to bring a half a gallon of milk home to their family that I don't want to say they're starving, but they're food insecure. I really think that over the past year, so much of food insecurity, so much of immunity, so much of health and wellness, so much of the importance of real foods have really come and bubbled to the surface that coming out of this, and we will come out of this, I think we're all going to be so much better off.
People, you bring up a really valid, strong point. People want to know where their food comes from. They want food. They want real food. And they want something that's also tastes delicious. And dairy just checks each one of those boxes. It's nutritious. It's something that's going to help their immune system. It's something that's going to it's a good fat for them. It's going to fill them up, and it really is a nutritious product that will help them in the future. And so it's nice to be able to give them some nourishment as well.
Absolutely. When I was growing up, and obviously my father grew up on a dairy farm, we always had ice cream in the house. And, our neighbors and my parents' friends and whatever else, would talk about it. My father said, ice cream is a food, it's dairy. It is a food. So when we look at the past, 10 months or so, what are any of the consumer trends that you've seen? Have there been any surprises? For me, the one that's probably the most upsetting, and I probably shouldn't say this, is when people went to supermarkets and when cow's milk was not available, and they'd go to oat milk or other plant-based milks, and all of a sudden we saw all the press releases from Nielsen and IRI saying, oh my god, all these alternatives are growing by leaps and bounds, hundreds of percentages, but it was on such a tiny
Yeah.
base. It didn't make a difference. And those are the kinds of reporting that really annoys me, because that's misleading to the average consumer.
Mhm. I think that probably, so the misleading of information is probably, people are trusting whatever they read on their cell phones. And, it's not necessarily fact based, it's not science based. And so that's something that we really would like to just remind people, let's look at the facts. Do some research. When you see a claim, do some research on it, find out the facts on it. Don't just point blank believe something that you read on social media, whatever platform, we're using. Because that's, people do tend to think that, well, the other juices are growing at such a great rate. They're not in comparison to how dairy is being purchased and how dairy is in 95% of the homes. So 95% of the households have dairy in them, whether they also have uh, an oat juice or something like that. They may, I think that percentage is up to 40% where people will have both in their refrigerators. But dairy is there.
Yeah, and what's so important is also turning around the package, looking at the nutritional
Mhm.
information, reading the ingredients, and seeing what's added to a lot of these products. And when it comes to cow's milk, nothing's added. Nothing's added.
Nothing, no. And you
So
can't beat the protein.
yeah,
You look at the value and the protein level that's in a glass of milk, and you can't beat that.
and also the naturally occurring sugars versus the added sugars. Very important for people to understand the difference there.
Absolutely. And the digestibility is very important. A glass of milk is digested much better, and it nourishes your body the way it should, as opposed to those other beverages that have so much added to them.
Yeah. So I'd like you to look, and this is a hard question, into your crystal ball. Post COVID, what's the direction that dairy is headed in? And do we have to make any changes to that?
Well, I think COVID has shown us we have to make changes. People want innovation. People want innovative products. People want dairy in new ways, and we have to get it to them. We have to be able to have that innovation and hand it to them. So, and at a much faster pace. Okay, so people don't have the patience to wait the years that it takes to develop a product. They want a new product, and they want it now. And so we have to be quicker at our research development. We have to be quicker at our innovation. And that's where I think Checkoff is so strong. It's a promotion and research board. We do a lot of research, and we have to tweak that research and figure out how can we innovate in a much quicker and more sustainable way.
So, last question. I've heard a lot about the net zero initiative. What is it? Who's involved? What's being done? And how is it going to benefit us?
So the bottom line is net zero. Net zero is being talked about across the globe. And it is something, when I became involved more intently with the FAO, the Food and Ag Organization, I was hearing net zero from a lot of different countries. And I was hearing about different regulations they were having for net zero. And our net zero initiative is really a project that we are trying to move forward, that will allow farmers to move with it, to allow farmers to have input, as opposed to a government regulated, um, regulation that's coming down and putting asks on farmers that are not reasonable. We want net zero. Net zero is we're not looking at net zero to be, every single farm across the country will arrive to the net zero initiative, but it's collectively coming together as an industry. So all farms coming together with what we do. We may have some farms that are already operating at a net zero impact. So they have a zero impact on the environment. We may have some farms that They're not going to be able to do every single new technology that comes down, comes through the pipeline, but it's being able to collectively come together as an industry, all farms working together. Not every farm will get there, but every farm can do something. So something as small as, a few years ago, Duane and I, we swapped out the lights in our freestall barn for LED lights. I was blown away with the savings that we had by taking out those higher wattage light bulbs and putting in LED lights. That's a small example, but that is, that's one example. We do have in the Net Zero Initiative, we have some farms that we're doing some testing with technology. Those are larger farms. As the technology is developed, we hope to scale that back so that it can be used on all size farmers. But we have, you could look. We need to look at manure as a commodity on our farms, and that's where we want to get to. Not just the Net Zero project, where we're not contributing. We're contributing less to the environment with our GHGs and our carbon, but also how can that bring a financial value back to the farmer?
So a couple thoughts. Number one is what I love about Net Zero is that the farmer has a seat at the table. So part of it, not only just being able to, as you pointed out, having a regulation that says you have to do this, but really understanding what farmers are looking for and how to execute it. Second, on manure, a couple of years ago when I was one of the judges at DMI's Innovation Awards, I loved cow pots, where here's a farmer's daughter who said, okay, I'm going to make pots out of manure that's going to be able to grow flowers or plants or whatever else faster, easier, smarter, and whatever else. So I love what you're doing, and keep up the great work. And thank you so much for being with us on Farm Food Facts today.
Oh, thank you. This has truly been a pleasure. So thank you very much.
U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action would like to recognize the sponsors of the 2020 Honor the Harvest Forum. Our movement sponsors, United Soybean Board and National Pork Board. Our presenting sponsors, Wells Fargo, Cargill, and DMI. Our platinum sponsor, the Native American Agriculture Fund. Our gold sponsors, Bader Rudder, Bayer, Corteva, Dairy West, Edelman, Ernst & Young, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, Frog, McDonald's, Nebraska Soybean Board, and Nutrien. Our silver sponsors, CoBank and OCP North America. Our bronze sponsor, Nestle Purina. Our copper sponsor, Ruan. And our donor sponsor, Tyson. For more on all things food and agriculture, please visit us at usfarmersandranchers.org. Also, be sure to look out for us on Facebook at US Farmers and Ranchers and on Twitter at USFRA. Until next time.